So have you always gone by Chris, or was there a transition from Christopher to Chris?
No, I've always been called Chris. I mean, my mom calls me Christopher. I use Christopher on a lot of documents and things like that. But generally speaking, everybody calls me Chris.
Got it. I love that your mom calls you Christopher.
A lot of my friends call me by my middle name, George, which is my dad's name and now my son's name. So now it makes a little bit less sense to call me George because it's that much more difficult to figure out who you're talking to.
Yeah. Yeah, some of my friends call me by my middle name because it's unique. My middle name is Janae.
Yeah.
So I've got a few people who call me Janae. Well, for those of you who have just joined us, we're just giving folks a few minutes to log in, and then we'll get started with the discussion. There'll be plenty of time at the end for questions. So please start thinking of questions, and you can submit them using the Q&A function on Zoom. So Chris, let's get started. Normally I would introduce our guests, but I want this to be more of a discussion and give you an opportunity to sort of tell your story and introduce your stuff. So just to kick us off, where are you from? Where did you go to school? Tell us a bit about your roots.
Yeah, absolutely. Born right here in Houston, Texas. Was raised on the southwest side of town. And so I went, just starting from the very beginning, went to Westbury Christian School for elementary, and then to Welch Middle School, like I said, right there in Southwest Houston. And I would have been zoned to Westbury, but in ninth grade, we moved out to Missouri City, graduated from Hightower High School in 2003. And then from there went on to Morehouse College in Atlanta. Graduated from Morehouse in 2007, became a consultant at McKinsey & Company for a couple of years, and then returned to graduate school at that point. I went to law school at Yale and got my MBA from Harvard Business School.
So you lived in Atlanta, you lived in Cambridge, you lived in New Haven, and you probably traveled a lot as a consultant. Which was your favorite?
Atlanta is probably second home. But DC is my favorite place. I really can't see myself not living in Houston, but if I had to choose another place to live that wasn't Houston, it'd probably be DC.
Okay. And you mentioned Houston's home, and I think I read online you come from a pretty big family. Is that right? Can you tell us a bit about your family?
Yeah. So, on my dad's side in particular, we go back in Houston at least 4 generations. The huge majority of my family, which it's more than 100 at this point, they all live in Houston. I think there were, when I lived outside of Texas for about a decade, I was one of maybe 5 total that didn't live in Houston. And so, I bump into cousins at the grocery store, or at least I did pre-COVID. Anytime I'm having an interaction in the community, there's going to be somebody who knows, my aunt or my cousin, or, went to church with my grandmother. And so it's really interesting. My family, I'm not familiar with family reunions because we've never had one. We never needed to have one. We just sort of see each other at Christmas, or whatever wedding or, other celebration of graduation. And so it's really cool. I mean, things like, a middle school graduation, or like a National Honor Society awards thing in high school, I would just have like tons of families show up to it, which is super abnormal, but I didn't know that at the time. But it's great to have such strong family roots here.
Yeah, I'm from Laredo. My extended family is all there, and I do miss that, having everyone around and bumping into people at the grocery store. Slowly, I'm getting that in Houston, but it's not the same. So it's really nice you have that foundation. Okay, so you go to law school, you graduate from law school. What was your first job out of law school?
So I returned to McKinsey & Company. Growing up, I from a young age, I thought I was going to be a lawyer. Like most kids and probably most people, I didn't have any true idea of what that meant. But I saw what lawyers did on TV, and I thought that would be cool, and I wanted to do that. And so I went when I first got to Morehouse, I was political science, pre-law, still sort of laser focused on being a lawyer. But then a buddy of mine who was a couple of years ahead of me, who had gone to McKinsey and Company, said, "Hey, Chris, I'm doing really interesting work. I'm meeting fascinating people. I'm traveling around the country, having a lot of different exposures that I wouldn't have had otherwise. You should think about what it might be to be a consultant. And I know that you're interested in a lot of things, besides the law, and this will help to broaden some of that exposure. In addition to, probably strengthening your law school, resume and all that kind of stuff."
Yeah.
And so went to McKinsey, enjoyed it, did it for 2 years, thought that was going to be it, and then went to law school. But my summers in law school, and I had, because of the JD MBA, I had 4 summers, literally. The first one, I did an exchange program in Chile, and on the back half of the summer, I helped a buddy with a political campaign. The second one I did in corporate law. I was at Wachtell Lipton in New York. And then the third one I did investment banking, at Goldman Sachs. I really enjoyed my time at Wachtell. I thought the work they did was phenomenal. I hated New York, and I was in this weird situation where I thought that, M&A law was like the only thing I wanted to do at that time. But those like multi-billion-dollar deals were happening in New York, and you couldn't have paid me any dollar amount to live in New York, and probably still couldn't.
What did you hate so much?
It's cramped, it's expensive, it's dirty, it's cold. I'm a Southern boy, and so being up in the Northeast for like 4 years at that point, 5 years, I had it. Yeah. I was ready to come back down here. Sitting here in January with it being 60 some odd degrees outside, yeah. that's much more of my speed.
No, I actually spent a couple of summers in New York too, and feel similarly. So,
and it's still hot, right? I mean, you walk around, you're riding the subway, or you're walking around the streets, and it's all just, it's yucky. You come inside and you need a shower. Yeah. There are a lot of things I love and appreciate about New York and other Northeastern cities, but I could just visit a couple times a year and get all that stuff and be great. Yeah. And so I was pretty dead set on coming home at that point. And so, and was thinking about a bunch of different things, but ultimately the familiarity of McKinsey, the fact that outside of M&A law, like I still probably didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. And so the flexibility, the type of work that I might get to do, as well as, of course, like the financial package and all of that, ultimately led me to returning to McKinsey, but this time coming home to the Houston office. And so moved back home in 2014 and was there at McKinsey for almost 4 years.
Okay, wow. And when did you start your own law practice?
So got married. So when I moved home, my then girlfriend, now wife, Morgan, moved with me, and we got married in 2015. My daughter Vivian was born in December of 2016, and then come say late January, early February, I'm back on a plane going to DC and New York to serve my clients. And that experience just became far less enjoyable at that point. I just really, we all have sort of those, the Sundays where you're just kind of like, just not ready for the week. Yeah. But that got so much worse when I knew that I was going to have to get on this like 6 a.m. flight and wouldn't see my daughter and my family, until, late Thursday. And so, went through 2017, but it just became more and more clear that this wasn't it for me in terms of that experience. I still love the work I was doing. I love the impact I was having. I love the clients, love the people I was working with. But wanted to get off of that plane, and the work that I was doing, which was public sector work. I was doing work at the Pentagon, and other state and local agencies, like I would not have been able to do it or sustain it without traveling. Maybe now in COVID scenarios, there's an opportunity to revisit that,
Yeah.
but at the time it wasn't feasible. And so thought I needed to do something for myself. Um, didn't have any particular, you know, business idea that I wanted to go explore. And so I said, all right, well, let's think about hanging out this shingle. And I had in college, in addition to the work at Wachtell, which was again very M&A and transactional, I interned in college at Jones Day in litigation. I had interned for a solo practitioner who I was essentially just like writing his briefs in college, and so I was pretty familiar with injury work and other types of work that I thought I could do and make a little bit of money on my own. And so late 2017, I hung out the shingle full time and have been going ever since.
Wow. Our president-elect, Tyler's president-elect, Alvin, recently started his own firm, and I know he's had his own challenges. What's been the biggest challenge for you starting your own firm over the past few years?
I think for anybody starting off, it's just literally starting off. You start off with zero clients, right? I mean, if you're lucky, you might start off with one or two because you sort of bagged them and then decided, let's go do this. And so you're figuring it all out. You're starting from the ground up from just an administrative standpoint. So I need to go and get bank accounts, and I need to set up, my office and my website and all these other things that take real time, and certainly take time away just from the core practice of law. And so just being able to be patient. I was lucky that I'd been working for a while, so I had, what you could call a little bit of a nest egg, and my wife was gainfully employed. And so I had far more of a cushion than a lot of people have, especially if you start, say, straight out of law school. But just being able to go through that time where you get everything set up, you're sort of ready, and then you're like, all right, I don't have a whole lot to do. I don't have clients. And so just being patient, doing the networking that you need to do, have the conversations that you need to have, obviously doing good work with the opportunities that you do get, because I think ultimately, and this is the way it is for me, I imagine it's the same way for most folks who are working for themselves or in a small practice, is that the huge majority of my clients come from referrals from previous clients. Mm-hmm. And so, just being able to get through that time where things are slow, do excellent work, and then let things, improve naturally.
What kind of cases do you handle most often?
The huge majority of what I do is public injury. I mean, I'm a plaintiff's attorney. Mm-hmm. I don't think I've done any defense work. If I have, I might have taken one small thing as like a favor, but I'm a plaintiff's attorney, mostly personal injury work. I've started to get involved in some commercial disputes. Again, usually that's because a friend calls me out of the blue, like all of us get calls from friends and family members, right, and I'll just get sucked in, like, all right, I'll help you on this thing. But some of that has gotten really interesting, and so I enjoyed that, and maybe, that's something I might think about building in the future. Mm-hmm. And then one of the most interesting things that I'm working on right now is that I'm on a legal team. There's 4 or so law firms that are representing Harris County, and we're suing big pharma companies for price fixing of drugs. Both there's sort of one case that's specifically around insulin and other diabetic drugs, and there's another case around a larger set of generic drugs. And essentially the crux of that case, and this is all sort of public stuff, there was actually a Senate report that just came out about it, is that between the pharmaceutical manufacturers and the pharmacy benefit managers, there's a significant amount of collusion going on that ultimately results in the price of something like insulin, which has been around for 100 years, the patent, was free, et
Right.
cetera, et cetera, et cetera, the price of that doubling and tripling over the course of time, for no true business or market reasons besides, greed and collusion.
Wow. So Harris County is your client in that.
Hmm.
And recently Harris County was your employer. So maybe we could transition to that. So how did the Harris County clerk position come to be? Like how did that happen for you? Because I know you stepped in and it was sort of a temporary thing. You've now transitioned out. So tell us a little
Hmm.
about how the beginning of that role.
Yeah. So I serve as one of the vice chairs of the Texas Democratic Party. And in that, of course, I have a lot of relationships, on the Democratic side, and have supported candidates and elected officials, and so on and so forth. And so that's an important part of the story, that I'll get to in a moment. Primarily, that's the reason that anybody downtown would know who I am, besides just being like some guy with a small law firm. And so, in May, going back to 2018, 2018 was the first time that Harris County in a non-presidential year had gone Democratic in a very long time. I'm sure the folks in this room saw the massive transition, in judges beginning in January of 2019, because sort of an entire Democratic slate won, for the first time in a long time. The other, races that were important at that time that flipped. There were numerous, but some that I'll name. One was county judge, who's now Lena Hidalgo. The second one was precinct 2 commissioner Adrian Garcia. And so because of those two flips, you now had a Democratic majority on the Harris County Commissioners Court, which makes a lot of very important decisions for the county. And then one of the others was county clerk, who's Diane Troutman. And the reason that was important there's a number of reasons, but a primary one is that the county clerk at that time, until very, very recently, served as the election administrator for the county. And so made very important decisions, about whether voting was going to be easy or hard for the voters of Harris County. And so, Diane took office with the goal of making voting easier. One of the things that she did, which she should be touted for, is the creation of what's called voting centers. And what that means is that on election day, if you live in Harris County, you can vote at any, voting center across the county, instead of just voting at the one that's in your neighborhood.
Yeah.
And what happens before this, very, very, very often, is still common across the country in places that don't have this, is people show up to vote on election day and they say, sorry, you're in the wrong place. You need to go here. And that person either, traverses across town and tries to go figure it out, or they don't vote.
Right.
And so that was one of the things that she did that was really fantastic. COVID happens. Diane Troutman is 70 years old. She has some unspecified health conditions in addition to her age. And knowing that the job required sort of being out and about, and really sort of being a frontline worker, she stepped down for health reasons. And so going into what I believe to be the most important election of our lifetimes, and also what was going to be the first election, of course, that happened during this pandemic, and brought along with it all of the complexities of something like that, we did not have an election administrator at all. And, while I give Diane Troutman a lot of credit, there was also, a lot of controversy because of, some shortcomings. In March of this year, which was the last election that she administered, there were lines that were open on election day until midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m. That while that wasn't like intentional on her administration's part, was seen as a failure, and was seen by some as voter suppression, basically, by making voting that difficult for people. And so there were some things that needed to be cleaned up, in addition to COVID-19, and in addition to this probably being the highest turnout election that we had seen in a really, really long time.
Right.
And so, as somebody in that, and this happened it was like the middle of May on a Saturday at 4 p.m. She hadn't told anybody, including her senior staff, that she was resigning, and it just happened. And we had a primary runoff election that was still coming up pretty soon. And so there was just some scrambling of like, who can step in and do this? And one, it's not a job that a lot of people wanted to do. I mean, they had seen the headlines of, just her getting thrashed by the paper for various reasons. A lot of people don't want to step into that. They knew, again, COVID-19, so on and so forth, that this was not potentially going to be glamorous, and might not be very enjoyable. Beyond that, some of the people who did want it, this is a massive, massive effort, and the type of skill set that would be needed to do this job effectively. You can't just put somebody in the spot and say, good luck. And so after having a few conversations, I believed that, particularly given my experience as a management consultant, and serving large government agencies that had problems like this, knowing how to, gear a large organization to sort of change direction and execute on something with a relative amount of speed, and also understanding the basics of the logistical challenges that would be faced. I thought that I would be able to do a good job. And the other thing that was important is that I was willing to go and just do it and then leave when it was done.
Mm-hmm.
What was very important to the county, the commissioner's court, was we don't want this to be a political thing. We want someone to come do the job. We want that person to pledge not to run for the job, just focus on doing it, do as well as you can. God bless you, and go home. Yeah. And so, honestly speaking, like, there were not more than 2 or 3 people in all of Harris County who were willing, able, and then willing to agree to some of these conditions. And ultimately I was selected after, a few interviews and conversations. And so there it was. I knew that I started the job in a couple of weeks' time. And I knew that a few weeks after that, we would literally start the first election in Harris County history under COVID-19, scenarios and circumstances. And oh, by the way, we don't have any PPE. Figure it out.
So had you considered serving in public office before, or was this something that you agreed to do given the unique circumstances?
Yeah, I mean, I'm passionate about politics and public service. My parents met each other working at the United States Postal Service. And then, my dad went on to serve with the Houston Police Department for 34 years. And so, service has always been something that was important to me. And then, I blew through sort of my resume, but I've worked on numerous campaigns. I served briefly in the Obama White House in 2009. And so I've always been really close to politics, and public service has been something that I thought, could happen in the future at some point. Right.
So in just the few weeks you had, Chris, before you started the position, was there anything you did to prep, like get in the right mental space, or actually, talk to people, stuff like that, before you took on the role?
Yeah, certainly. The very, well, even before I had been formally appointed, I knew that it was likely. And so I was just starting to do my homework, reaching out. I knew that there were numerous civil rights and voting rights groups who had been putting a lot of pressure on the county clerk's office, who had their own perspectives of things that could be done better. And so I started having conversations, both formal and informal, with them. But once I was formally appointed, that was on a Tuesday night at, I think 10:45 p.m. Wednesday morning at 8, we kicked off a 5-hour meeting with myself and what would become like my new senior staff.
Yeah.
And I was just like, tell me everything, right? And I already sort of had an outline based on previous conversations and homework and research of the things that I thought were important. And so I was just like, tell me where we are on this. You know, if there's a plan, talk to me about it. If there's not a plan, be transparent about it. Let's figure that out. And then just sort of kept building, and then was able to, once in the role, have more formal conversations with organizations like the Texas Civil Rights Project, like the Brennan Center for Justice, other, again, voting rights organizations across the country, the ACLU, et cetera, of just like, hey, what have y'all seen? What are y'all's recommendations? And then quite conveniently, many of them had written like 10-page angry letters to the county clerk's office in the previous months, detailing all of the different problems that they saw and potential solutions. And so I was able to just digest those really quickly and say, okay, let's look at these. Let's try and arrange them from critical to least important. And then let's also arrange them from like highly feasible, very easy to do, can snap my fingers and get it done, or like this is virtually impossible. And then try and tackle whatever we thought was, highest impact and most feasible, and get that stuff done as quickly as possible.
So for the people who are watching, what are the main responsibilities of the Harris County Clerk?
Well, so at the time, the county clerk was the elections administrator for the county. That's no longer the case. I was the last county clerk to serve in that capacity. And going forward, there will be a nonpartisan elections administrator who serves in that role. And so that's now a woman who was a senior staff member of mine named Isabel Longoria, who I think is going to do a fantastic job. But the county clerk does a number of other things. So there are county courts at law and JP courts that the county clerk is responsible for, maintaining documentation for. Any like pertinent record that you could think of countywide. So birth certificates, death certificates, marriage licenses, real property records, archives. These are all examples of things that are housed in the county clerk's office. So the county clerk, again, while no one normally knows who the county clerk is, and it's not seen as a really interesting job, it's quite important. When at the time when your family member suddenly passes away, you have to figure out estate stuff. You're going to use the county clerk's office. When you're forming that union with your partner, we help you make that happen and make that legal. And so many other things. I think all of us, whether in our professional lives or our personal lives, have utilized the county clerk's office at one point or another, just because, I think the motto is, recording, what is it? Yeah, recording the events of your life. Some of those major, inflection points in anyone's life, you're going to interact with the county clerk's office. So it's a pretty important role, although, not the sexiest role of all time.
Yeah, they're very significant. And so given all of those responsibilities, how big was your team?
The entire county clerk's office as it stood then was just under 350 people. So a pretty big staff. The elections piece of that is at the lowest point about 70. As you get to like election day, it's sort of all hands on deck. So nearly all 300 and so on have some role in the election. But sort of in the interim, as you're gearing up for election, but not quite there, you're probably thinking about 120 to 150 people.
Yeah. It's a lot of people.
And then for sure. And then when you think about the temporary employees that come in to do election related work, as well as then the folks who serve as election clerks and election judges, that swelled up this year to nearly 12,000.
Wow. And yeah, I know we did that video recruiting poll workers, and I'm curious, volunteers, Harris County ended up seeing a lot of them. There was a good turnout for those positions.
Yeah, certainly. We knew from early analysis that we were going to need a record number of people sign up and do this work. And there was a decent amount of concern that because of COVID-19, folks weren't going to want to do that work. Folks were going to want to stay at home.
Yeah.
And, we were just really aggressive in our recruiting, reaching out to any organization who would talk to us, to try to serve as partners and to help us in that effort. And then we ended up getting a whole lot of help from outside. So many different organizations saw how important this was, and proactively stepped in to help us recruit. And so we were getting, from the day that we opened up our applications in the July timeframe, we were getting upwards of 500 applications a day. And so by the end of it, we had, frankly, a glut of options. We had over 40,000 applicants.
Wow.
And we're able to focus on quality versus just filling seats, which is, obviously it's a luxury, but a sort of a necessary luxury, in my opinion, to be able to put, good people in those seats versus just whoever showed up with a pulse.
Right. That's great. I can't believe the volunteer turnout. And you were talking about earlier your lists of most important, most feasible. What was at the top of those lists when you combined those two? What were your main goals, things that you thought were really important and could be achieved?
Yeah, I mean, so we ended up, and I say ended up with, we started off with, so on day one, I already had a list of things that we needed to achieve. We announced that formally on my 15th day in office, so my third Monday. And that plan had 23 initiatives on it. Of those 23, somewhere around 14 or 15, we wanted to put in place in some way in the July election that was just, at the time of announcement, 2 weeks away. And then all 23 of them we wanted to be able to achieve by the time we got to November. But highest up on that list, again, safety was the top priority. And so PPE was of critical importance. There was no way that we could have this election without securing the PPE that we needed to keep the voters safe, but frankly, more importantly, to keep those election workers safe who were in there for hours at a time doing this important work. Training was particularly important. Again, this was a set of new practices and procedures that needed to be followed. And so training had to be completely revamped. From an accessibility standpoint, we needed to make sure that people across Harris County had real opportunities to cast their ballots. So choosing locations for voting centers was really important, making sure that there were enough of them, not only just, again, to get closer and closer to your house, but also in the world of social distancing, the more locations that we had, that means fewer people per location and a safer experience for everybody. Voting by mail was extremely important in our eyes, or at least the opportunity to vote by mail for those who were eligible. And so my very first act in office was to mail out vote by mail applications to seniors, to those who were age 65 and older, who were automatically eligible to vote by mail because of their age, and of course, who were particularly susceptible to COVID-19. We gave them all the opportunity to, if they wanted to, apply and get a mail ballot. Of course, if they didn't want to, they could toss that thing in the trash, no big deal. And so those were some of the bigger things. Of course, with promoting vote by mail, we had to do the back end work of supporting vote by mail infrastructure, because if we got an influx, doubling, tripling, quintupling of mail ballots that came in, we had to be able to process those. We had to do it in a timely fashion and be able to report those results out, and of course keep that whole process secure. So that was an early investment area for us as well.
Yeah, and you had some unique initiatives too, like the drive-through voting. How did that idea come up, and what was the implementation of it like?
Yeah, so I mean, I've always been of the belief that, frankly, like there's nothing new under the sun. And so in situations like this, the best thing you can do is talk to people who've done this stuff before, figure out what they're doing, steal their good ideas, learn where they messed up, don't repeat, their mistakes. And so another thing that we did in my first week or two in office was we reached out to a dozen or so jurisdictions who had already had elections during the time of COVID-19. And we just asked them, what'd you do? How'd it go? How would you rate yourself? What were the things that you would definitely repeat or expand? What are the things that you wouldn't do again? And just learn from their experience. And Wisconsin, we spoke to the county of Milwaukee, as well as the state, and as well as some other localities there. And one of them mentioned drive-through voting. And then I had a conversation with Travis County Clerk, Dana Debevoise, about research she had done into drive-through voting. And, her findings were basically that this could be done, but they didn't want to do it in Travis County in July because they just thought it would go haywire with the heat. And so we said, yeah, that's probably true. But if we're going to do this in November when it's less hot, we don't want this to be the first time that we've ever done it. So what can we do in the interim? And so what we came to was a very small and essentially secret pilot that took place in July. We opened up drive-through voting on one day. It was at HCC West Loop, which is over near the Galleria. And we didn't announce it ahead of time, but if you showed up on that day, we just said, hey, if you want to, you can go and vote without ever getting out of your vehicle. You just go over to that parking garage, drive in. If you don't want to do that, you can just walk right inside and vote the way you intended to when you came in. And 200 or so folks opted to go and cast their ballots through drive-through voting. We had them go through that experience. We had already done a dry run with no voters where, sort of I drove in and was the voter, and some other people went through the experience to try and fine tune it. And then those voters were used as guinea pigs. And then we asked them on the way out, we said, hey, can you stop for just a few more minutes and just take a survey to help us understand how you enjoyed this and what we can do better? Of the 200 people, like 175 of them took the survey. And then which was astounding in itself.
Yeah, you didn't even bribe them with some gift card or something? They just
No, it was just like, you got a couple more minutes to, to do your civic duty. And so a lot of people took the survey, and we asked them, on a 1 to 10 scale, how would you rate your experience? And they rated it a 9.6. And then we asked them on a 1 to 10 scale, would you recommend this experience to a friend? And they rated that a 9.7. And so we said, like, this is a winner, right? Like, people like this. And of course there was some feedback. Hey, you could do this, you could do that. And we had our own people out there with clipboards kind of analyzing things as well. But we said, this is certainly something that there's an appetite for in Harris County. And for safety reasons, as well as convenience reasons, we should try and roll this out at a grander scale.
Yeah. Then came some legal challenges, and I know you, I'm sure, had a role in that. And I'm just curious, with a group of young lawyers, what your role was and what you were looking for when you hired counsel to help with that.
Yeah, for sure. I would imagine, so when I was a consultant, the worst client to have was a former consultant, because they would get in the weeds with you. And then the other thing is that they sort of knew what you were capable of, from sort of, they knew you could stay up 24 hours to do some work. And so they'd ask you to do that every now and then, when a normal client probably wouldn't. And so I would further imagine that, having a lawyer as the client is probably the least fun job for a lawyer, because I got into the weeds. I tried my best to say, y'all are truly the ones who are doing this work. Y'all are doing the research, et cetera, et cetera. But I would question their assumptions. I'd push them to say, hey, can we strengthen our argument here? Can we go run down, opinions kind of in this area that are a little bit more on point, and so on and so forth. But we had a fantastic legal team, not only the county attorney's office here in Harris County, but we had, a retained counsel who normally works on election matters. And then that expanded even further to some other firms who stepped in to do, free and discounted work because they knew how important it was.
Yeah.
And so we had at various points throughout the sort of the summer and fall, there were probably 10 lawyers working on this stuff at any given time. And again, I would pull myself out of that because I did my best to let them do the work and then sort of react to it versus, digging in with them. Yeah. But was very close, on the issues. I read every brief, everything from what happened here at the county district court all the way up to Supreme Court stuff. I was involved in moots and all of that stuff as well. And then at one point served as a witness, which was pretty interesting.
Yeah. Well, I have several more questions, but I do want to remind everyone watching that you can submit questions too. So down at the bottom, using the Q&A feature, feel free to submit a question and I'll make sure to ask Chris. But Chris, I do have a few more questions of my own. So obviously record turnout, huge year for Harris County and this election. And I'm wondering what you think the secret was. Obviously, I'm sure a lot went into it, but what do you think made the difference, if you could name just a couple things?
Yeah, I mean, I think there were, 3 or 4 things that made the difference. One, sorry.
That's okay.
One, I'm on my phone doing Zoom, and so whenever a call comes up, it kind of messes things up.
Yeah.
We had a very polarizing president, and we're in a presidential year, and so whatever your politics are, I think people were more motivated generally to be involved in this election. Fast forward to March, April, May of this year, and you have COVID-19, which gives people even more of a reason to think that elections matter. And also put more people, on their couch in front of screens. And I think people were paying more attention to what was going on in the world, and the important aspects of politics and government. And then, the next thing, was, George Floyd, the Black Lives Matter movement, which in itself, I think, was fueled by people sitting at their house paying attention to stuff, because deaths like George Floyd sadly happen all the time. But his passing, sparked a level of engagement and consternation that hadn't been seen in a very long time. And frankly, while there remains so much more to be done, the progress that has taken place just in the last 8 months or so, to me, it's the largest civil rights movement of my life. Right. And it could be argued that it dwarfed even what took place, in the 60s, although it's not an argument that I'd be anxious to wade into. So that was already gonna be happening, right? Then, I'll give us some credit. We did everything that we could to make voting easier, safer, for everybody, to get the messages out of things you needed to do, like be registered to vote, for instance, to stress the importance of voting, to try to make it cool, to try to make it interesting, to engage folks.
Chris, you guys have a great Instagram account. I love the social.
Yeah, we were pretty good on social media. Our team deserves a lot of credit. It was really entertaining stuff. But just letting people know, if you look at 2016 here in Harris County, during the early voting period, there were about 40 voting centers where you could vote at across the county. We made 120. So we made it 3 times as likely that you could vote near your house, near your child's school, near your place of worship, near your job. We brought in drive-through voting, 10 locations across the county where you could just pull up with ease, cast a ballot. We promoted voting by mail. We made sure that all of our seniors had immediate access. We attempted, and this was another legal battle, to try and inform all 2.5 million of our registered voters of Harris County about their rights and allow them to decide for themselves if they were eligible to vote by mail. 24-hour voting, which we haven't touched on yet. Allowing folks who were working shifts in the Port of Houston, who were working in the medical center saving lives, who were stocking shelves and get off at 2 and 3 in the morning, welders and electricians, so many others. We gave those folks the opportunity to cast a ballot in a way that they hadn't had before. And thousands and thousands of people took us up on that. And so we made it simpler, safer, and more accessible. And then the last thing that I think is really important was, a lot of this pushback that we got. Voting suppression has been taking place since voting, right? Like, period. It's not new. But a lot of times the things that happen that suppress votes are done in a, clandestine manner. They're done sort of secretly, and people don't even know the effects that are the things that are taking place that are affecting them.
Right.
What we saw in 2020 was not that. It was door in your face kind of stuff where you saw on the news, which you were paying more attention to because you were more engaged because of COVID-19 and because of Black Lives Matter and all this other stuff, that there were people who were trying to make it as hard as possible for you to vote in ways that did not make sense and were not supported by the law. And I think, anybody, you try to take something away from them that they believe is theirs, they're going to react a certain way to that. And I think Texans in particular are more so of like, oh, you're gonna take away my right to vote. Well, I'll show you. Like, I'm gonna be first in line. And so I think that was certainly another reason that we saw the record turnout that we did.
Yeah, and we actually got a question. I think you mostly just answered it, but in case there's anything you want to add, the question was, what type of impact do you think you and your office had on voters who are typically disenfranchised?
Yeah. So
but if there's anything you want to add, please.
Yeah, again, doing just whatever we could that was feasible to get people involved, make them aware, and ultimately make their experience a smooth and a safe one and an accessible one. We partnered with the Houston Rockets and the Texans and the Dynamo and the Dash, opened up those stadiums. University of Houston Cougars gave us their football stadium. Rice gave us their football stadium, so people could cast ballots again in a way that was easy, but also, it added some notoriety to the situation. You could, take your selfie outside or what have you, and that means a lot these days, apparently. We're partnering with organizations like the Texas Medical Center to put, a voting center right there, so that patients and their families and nurses and doctors could cast their ballots. And all this stuff was novel in that it hadn't happened before in Harris County, but it's not stuff that should be novel. Right. The election administrators should be thinking, how do we set up this election to maximize participation? Because that's what democracy is all about. And that's why we're doing this work. And so that's the mindset that we had. And I think we were pretty darn effective at effectuating that.
I completely agree. One of the attendees asked, were you worried about the lawsuits filed at the midnight hour to try to invalidate the drive-through votes?
I was. I believed, wholeheartedly that these lawsuits were just, frivolous. And I mean frivolous under the legal definition, just totally bogus with no grounding in law or fact. And, with about a week and a half before the election, there had been, a mandamus at the Supreme Court level, and the Supreme Court had tossed it. There was a minority opinion from Divine, but an all Republican court had 8-1 said, like, get out of here.
Yeah.
And so that gave us a lot of comfort. And so when it got filed again at the Supreme Court level, and then also with a sister suit in federal court, we were pretty confident. However, because at that point there were 127,000 votes at stake,
Yeah.
we had to take it extremely seriously. And, we couldn't just say, yeah, y'all know this is bogus. We know this is bogus. We'll wait for the court to do whatever. I mean, we had to really just dig in and throw everything we could at it to make sure that we didn't leave anything to chance. Yeah. And so we had an additional slew of lawyers who stepped up to do work, and we're very grateful to them. I remember having meetings that Saturday to walk these lawyers through, we set up, an entire drive-through voting experience so they could see it, and then walk them through the voting experience at a walk-in voting center so they can see how analogous and essentially, identical it was. Talk them through, answer any question that they could have so that they could be prepared to make any argument that they needed to make. And so, was worried because of the potential downside impact, was not especially fearful that we could lose, but we knew that there was a chance. And we went to federal court. There was a Bush 43 appointed judge who many thought to be extremely conservative. And then because there's so much angst, you had folks who were like, this is a plot, he's going to throw it out for some bogus reason. And then the Fifth Circuit's going to affirm because they're super conservative. And then, Amy Barrett just got put on the Supreme Court and they're going to have the votes. And so, I never believed any of this stuff, but there were folks who thought, these justices who have made decisions that I disagree with, but who took an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States, are just going to throw out the Constitution and throw out, well over 100 years of judicial precedent to disenfranchise over 100,000 people. And I just thought it was absurd. And so when we got into the hearing, the judge actually made it clear that he thought it was absurd. And so the hearing was about 3 hours long, and we got into a lot of different arguments. But about 5 minutes in, he said, not verbatim, but he made it pretty clear, like, look, these 127,000 votes are safe. We're going to talk a little bit more about some other nuanced things, but I'm not going to throw out these votes because this is like some 11th hour BS effort. And so that was good. And then that gave us a lot more comfort over the additional 2 hours and 55 minutes to duke out the sort of ancillary issues. But I was relieved that my belief in the world, which perhaps is naive, that these judges would uphold their oath, came true. And later that night, the Fifth Circuit affirmed his decision after their, additional Hail Mary attempt.
Yeah. Just got a couple more questions. So I'll take one of them. The question is, how soon until we see new voting machines in Harris County elections? Do you have any insight into that?
Very, very, very soon. Without going into specifics around procurement, we should see the county attorney present a recommendation to Harris County Commissioners Court in the next month or so about new machines. And if everything goes right, those machines will be in place for municipal elections in May of this year. If they miss the May deadline, then certainly by, the next major elections, which are the midterm elections in November of 2022, there will be new machines. Those machines will be, sort of touch screens, sort of iPad type capabilities, but also with a paper backup, which I think is important to a lot of people these days, just so that there's always a record that can be audited of how people voted.
Great. And speaking of what's next, Chris, what's next for you? What do you have planned now that your big year as Harris County Clerk is up?
Yeah, a few things. On the personal front, I put my law firm essentially to the side for half a year, and so have been digging back into that. I have a very strong associate who has been carrying the weight, but it's a lot of weight, and so been getting back involved with the law firm to just to get us back rolling. That's a big thing. Seeing my kids, my son George was born in July during the primary runoff election,
Okay.
and was able to sit for about a day and a half in the hospital, and then didn't see a whole lot of them from then to November, and so making up for that now for sure. And then on the politics and policy front, two things. One, there were so many issues around laws in the state of Texas and laws in the United States that my eyes were open to during my experience. And so we'll be spending time in Austin during our session that's currently going on right now, and spending time in DC to advocate for new laws that will make voting easier for everybody. There are just some things that are in place specifically to try to make voting more difficult for those who are otherwise entitled to vote, and those things need to change. And so I'll be advocating for a renewed and strengthened Voting Rights Act at the federal level, and also some state laws that will make voting simpler and more convenient and safer for Texas voters. And then finally, on the somewhat partisan front, the Texas Democratic Party, which I remain a senior officer of, is doing essentially sort of a post-mortem effort on 2020 to understand what happened, how it happened, why it happened, and what can be done going forward to strengthen and increase the likelihood of a Democratic majority coming about in Texas in the near term. And so I'm chairing the committee that's leading that effort. And so a significant amount of my time over the next 6 months or so will be spent doing that work. And if you'd be interested in supporting that work or being a part of it, I'd love to hear from you.
Well, final question, because I know we're running out of time. With all of those things you have going on, your wife is also a lawyer, right? And now with the two little ones, what's your advice to young lawyers for juggling it all, or just advice generally that you want to share with the people watching?
It's a real challenge, and frankly, especially if you are in a two-person working household, you need help. Period. Don't be shy about it, whether it's from friends and family or seeking professional support. You need that. My wife works harder than I do. She was on maternity leave during the time when I was county clerk, and so I think that was a blessing from a timing perspective. But going into 2021, we're both working, and she's working far longer hours than I am. She's an M&A partner at White and Case and has however many live deals and so on and so forth going on right now. So get help. Don't be shy about it. Don't be ashamed about it. Do what you can, on the weekends, or whether it's locking down dinner time, which I try to sort of from 6 to 8 carve out and not take meetings and just spend that time with family and the kids in particular. Structure those small commitments that you can meet, and get as much help as you can.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I know you're busy. We appreciate it. If people have questions or are interested in working with you, how should they reach you?
Yeah, my personal email is Chris at hollinsfortexas.com. HOLLINS FOR Texas.com. Despite all this and having been in the news and everything, I still get so many people who think my last name is Collins with a C. And so no offense taken. It's been happening since I was in elementary school. But if you're trying to reach me, it's hollinsfortexas.com.
People always think there's a T in my name, so I get it. Well, thanks, Chris. Again, it was a pleasure. And everyone who joined, thanks for tuning in. And we'll see you at the next tile event.
My pleasure. Y'all have a great one.
Thanks. Bye.